Before the arrival of Europeans, North America was home to a vibrant mosaic of Native American cultures, each with its own distinct way of life. These were not merely scattered tribes, but sophisticated societies with their own unique traditions, languages, and governance systems that had evolved over centuries. They were skilled farmers, hunters, and fishermen, living in harmony with the land and its resources, ensuring sustainability for future generations. From the eastern woodlands to the Great Plains, Native Americans had established extensive trade networks, demonstrating their economic prowess and social interconnectedness, which spanned vast distances. Their spirituality was deeply rooted in nature, their respect for the earth reflected in every aspect of their lives, from their rituals to their daily practices. This was a world yet untouched by European influence, a world on the cusp of dramatic change that would alter its course forever. The arrival of Europeans shattered this delicate balance, bringing with them new diseases, technologies, and a hunger for land. Driven by the pursuit of land and riches, they viewed the Native Americans through a lens of cultural bias, often failing to recognize the complexity of their societies. What they perceived as primitive was, in reality, a complex civilization that had thrived for centuries, with rich traditions and advanced knowledge. This fundamental misunderstanding would lay the groundwork for centuries of conflict and displacement, leading to profound and lasting impacts on Native American communities. The Native Americans were not passive observers in the unfolding drama. They actively engaged in defending their lands and way of life. They were active agents in their own right, forging alliances, resisting encroachment, and adapting to the changing circumstances with resilience and determination. Their story is not just one of tragedy and loss, but also of resilience, resistance, and the survival of their cultural identity against all odds, a testament to their enduring spirit. The arrival of the Pilgrims in 1620 marked a significant turning point in the history of Native Americans and the future of the continent. The Mayflower, carrying its weary passengers, finally landed on the shores of what is now Massachusetts after a grueling journey across the Atlantic. These early colonists were ill-prepared for the harsh realities of the New World, facing an environment far more challenging than they had anticipated. They faced starvation and disease, their hopes dwindling with each passing day as they struggled to survive in the unfamiliar land. In these desperate circumstances, they were aided by the Wampanoag, a tribe native to the region, who extended a helping hand. The Wampanoag, led by Chief Massasoit, saw an opportunity for peaceful coexistence with the newcomers, hoping to establish a mutually beneficial relationship. They taught the Pilgrims how to cultivate the land, sharing their invaluable knowledge of native crops and essential hunting techniques. This assistance proved crucial to the survival and eventual thriving of the Plymouth colony, ensuring the settlers could sustain themselves. In the fall of 1621, the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag shared a harvest feast, an event that would later become known as the First Thanksgiving, symbolizing their cooperation. The initial cooperation between the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag offered a glimmer of hope for a peaceful future. It suggested that perhaps two vastly different cultures could coexist peacefully in this new land, sharing resources and knowledge. However, this early harmony was built on a fragile foundation, with underlying tensions that would soon surface. As more European settlers arrived, the pressure on land and resources intensified, straining the delicate balance. The stage was set for a clash of cultures, a conflict that would have far-reaching consequences for both sides, altering the course of history. The peace between the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag proved to be short-lived. As more European settlers arrived, they brought with them their own ambitions and prejudices. They viewed the Native Americans as obstacles to their expansion, their way of life as inferior. The concept of land ownership, central to European culture, clashed with the Native American view of land as a shared resource. The arrival of Europeans also brought with it a more insidious threat disease. Smallpox, measles, and other illnesses to which Native Americans had no immunity ravaged through their communities. Entire villages were decimated, their populations decimated by these invisible invaders. The Native Americans, already struggling to cope with the influx of settlers, were ill-equipped to deal with this new enemy. The once abundant lands that had sustained the Native Americans for generations were steadily shrinking. Treaties were signed and broken, the promises made to the Native Americans disregarded with impunity. As the settlers encroached further into their territories, tensions escalated. The Native Americans, facing the loss of their land, their way of life, and their very existence, were left with a stark choice: fight or be relegated to the margins of their own homeland. Section 4. A continent engulfed, King Philip's War and its aftermath. The simmering tensions between the colonists and the Native Americans finally erupted in 1675 with King Philip's War. Metacomet, the chief of the Wampanoag, known to the colonists as King Philip, led a desperate uprising against the encroaching settlers. The war was a brutal conflict marked by atrocities on both sides. For 3 years, the war raged across New England. Villages were burned, families torn apart, and the land stained with the blood of both Native Americans and colonists. The war ended in defeat for the Native Americans, a defeat that would have devastating consequences for generations to come. King Philip was killed, his body mutilated and displayed as a grim trophy. King Philip's War marked a turning point in the relationship between Native Americans and colonists. It shattered any illusions of peaceful coexistence and ushered in an era of relentless expansion and displacement. The Native Americans, their numbers decimated by war and disease, were forced to cede vast tracts of land and retreat to ever-shrinking territories. The dream of living in harmony with the newcomers lay in ruins, replaced by a grim reality of subjugation and dispossession. Section 5. Uprooted and displaced, the trail of tears and forced removals. The 19th century witnessed a new wave of brutality against Native Americans' forced removal. Entire communities were uprooted from their ancestral lands, facing an uncertain and perilous future. The United States government, driven by westward expansion and the lure of land, enacted policies designed to displace Native Americans from their ancestral homelands. This was a calculated move to seize fertile lands and resources. The Indian Removal Act of 1830 authorized the president to negotiate treaties to remove Native American tribes east of the Mississippi River to lands west of the Mississippi. This act marked the beginning of a dark chapter in American history. These treaties were often coerced, signed under duress by tribal leaders with little choice but to comply. The promises made were rarely kept, leading to further suffering and displacement. The Cherokee Nation, despite having adopted many European customs and even having their own written language, were forcibly removed from their lands in the southeast. Their efforts to assimilate were met with betrayal and violence. Their tragic journey, known as the Trail of Tears, stands as a stark reminder of the cruelty inflicted upon Native Americans. Families were torn apart, and many lives were lost along the way. Thousands of Cherokee perished during the forced march westward, victims of hunger, disease, and exposure. The harsh conditions and lack of resources made survival nearly impossible. The Trail of Tears was not an isolated incident, but part of a systematic campaign of ethnic cleansing that targeted numerous Native American tribes. This was a deliberate effort to erase their presence and culture. The Seminole, the Creek, the Choctaw, and many others were forcibly removed from their homelands, their lives uprooted, their cultures disrupted. The legacy of these forced removals continues to impact Native American communities today. Section 6. Confined within life on reservations. The forced removal of Native Americans to reservations marked a new chapter in their history, a chapter defined by confinement, assimilation, and the erosion of their traditional way of life. The reservations, often located on remote and less desirable lands, became instruments of control designed to isolate Native Americans and limit their autonomy. Life on reservations was harsh and unforgiving. The Native Americans, stripped of their ancestral lands and their traditional means of subsistence, were now dependent on the very government that had dispossessed them. The rations provided were often inadequate, and the promised support rarely materialized. The government's assimilation policies aimed to eradicate Native American culture and identity. Children were forcibly removed from their families and placed in boarding schools, where they were forbidden to speak their native languages or practice their traditions. The goal was to civilize them, to strip them of their heritage and mold them into the image of the dominant society.